thank you to Sam and Judy for looking at different angles of what strategy is. And I guess this is where the academic perspective comes in. Totally living in a world that is totally removed from the reality in some ways. But in other ways, in academia, we're always struggling to teach students what strategy is and how to make digital marketing work, obviously, because the subject area is so fast moving. So I'm really excited to hear some of the, shall we say, real ideas how to make stuff work. When it comes to strategy, I think from my point of view, it's important to note that there is a small difference to my understanding what strategy might mean. Generally, I'm coming from academic background, so the idea is that a strategy would be something you would be committing your business for longer term sort of direction for operations. So hopefully this will be offering people a bit more generic view or conceptual understanding of what strategy might be or how it could work or not. The reason for this talk is predominantly driven by a number of things. One of the things that we want to do as academics, obviously trying to test how good we are with what we are teaching and also practicing. So we actually run several campaigns, and as a result of these campaigns, we also submitted them into a number of awards, and we've been lucky enough to win them a couple of years ago. We haven't been so lucky to win many this year, but we've been shortlisted and I'm delighted to be part of it. And obviously, in the last couple of months, I've been lucky to join the UK as well as the European Search Awards, as well as the Northern Digitals. And one of the interesting things there is that every single award category has an option to write a strategy. And then all the entrants have to then explain how that strategy or the objectives or the aims have been translated into something that is more tangible. And, you know, obviously, as somebody who was entering these entries myself, and now as a judge, I can see that there is quite a lot of confusion of what these objectives are and what a good strategy is. And then obviously trying to see that strategy in a 1,000-word description is a major challenge, as obviously Sam and Judy have been judging as well. So they will be able to feed back on some of the reasons of why some entries win and some don't. So, good digital marketing strategy, what is it? And this is where we've tried to pull our brains together with a number of universities. We've had 5 universities around Europe and over 60 industry advisors of how we could help both companies as well as our students to get this exciting topic into one coherent story. So ultimately, the basic idea that we've been able to come up with is that, you know, regardless of what industry you're in, regardless of the country that you are based, you will have an organization that has certain objectives. And it was great to hear the first talk today talking about the buyer personas idea. And ultimately, that organization is trying to communicate with a buyer persona and to connect the organization's objectives to the buyer persona. You have centrally the content, which will either be paid for, such as mentioned by Sam, or as also paid for, as mentioned by Judy, I believe, and or perhaps obviously earned or created by yourself. And then obviously you have the multiple channels that you would use. We've mentioned paid PC, organic, PR, any other channels you might be able to use. Also, not to forget the real world events or activities that you might be able to place in stores and other things that an organization might be involved in. And ultimately, what the benefit of digital channels brings us to is that most of these are coming with data. Although data is not perfect in any of the tools that I've seen so far, and several tools contradict each other, but there is a general trend that Google Analytics and the likes will really provide something really useful for us to learn. So the key point to our proposition is that when somebody's trying to think of a digital marketing strategy, an organization, so this would be in-house or as a client, it would be really, really helpful for us as a awards judge to see who are the people that you are targeting, what is your business objective of your organization, what kind of content, what channels were used, and what data you are using to judge that particular sort of campaign or operation of that strategy. So to judge all these wonderful things, we like to see smart objectives, and that's again another interesting point that I see many times looking at or writing these for award entries, that a smart objective has to be specific. So that means it has something that we can say it's been achieved or not, measurable. So we need to have some kind of quantitative indicator whether we are doing traffic or not. Obviously achievable and realistic and time bound. So we really want to see sort of a time indicator. Is it year-on-year growth they are looking for? Is it month-on-month, or any other attribution metrics that you might be able to look at in terms of the successfulness of your strategy? So I guess this is the other thing that we are looking at from the more generic strategy development. So there is not just the marketing things that we need to bear in mind here. It's also sort of general business management things. So, for example, a SWOT analysis that comes out of the political, economical, social, technical, legal, and environmental, and then obviously the ANSOF metrics, looking at different products and services that you would have. So what we've come up with here is a very basic A4 sheet, and the rule is that you shouldn't be creating any more than one A4 sheet for one of your strategic business objectives. And if you can summarize all your digital marketing strategy activities in one of these A4 sheets, then you're doing pretty well. We've seen some strategies that have been written for 40, 50 pages, and ultimately the best person who has read it is the person who's actually authored it. The other person who might have approved it might have skim read it, and the reality is it is then sitting somewhere on a hard drive or on a shelf, which isn't going to be used by anybody else. Obviously, we realize you do need to spend a lot of time researching these different things or strategies for organizations, but if you can think of the three strategic points, so for example, the business objectives that you would make clear on the left, the buyer personas that you're targeting, the content that you're going to be writing about, channels, is it paid, organic, or whatever else you might be looking at, and then obviously the strategic keyword research or terms that you might be looking for. And the last but not least is the KPIs, to see how these things are working or not. Obviously, any strategy is only as good as the implementation. This is why it's quite useful to have a plan, how this will be put into operation. So we've got the option to put out the dates for planning, acting, observing, and when this strategy will be reviewed. So the whole idea is that we're mostly working with small and medium-sized enterprises, and they like the idea of simplicity. So I challenge you all to try and see if this strategy would work for your campaigns or not. Or if you have an amazing large document, I would also be delighted to hear and see some examples of how you would be approaching a simple strategy communication forward. So when it comes to the assessment of the strategy, and this is something that we have in terms of the reverse engineering idea, we have adopted with kind permission, Professor Brian Smith from Pragmatic, 12 questions that will help us to evaluate our strategic planning ideas. So what I would like you to do now is think about a project or a digital marketing strategy that you might have for your organization or for one of your clients or somebody else, and try and play this little quiz. So we have 12 questions, and obviously by answering these honestly, you will only benefit yourself rather than anybody else. So here we go. So the first question is our digital marketing strategy making it clear what markets or parts of the markets we will be concentrating our efforts on? So this is going back to the importance of the buyer persona spring and the importance of understanding what the individual is looking for. So as you can see, we've got 4 answers here. So you've got a digital marketing strategy that attacks all of the market sector equally, which in our case would be equally to 0, because in terms of marketing, we really need to be a bit more focused. So if the focus is on the descriptor groups, so essentially you have started thinking about buyer personas, then you could score yourself a 1. And if your digital marketing strategy attracts needs-based segments, then you would be going for 2. And if you haven't got a clue, then you could score yourself as a -1. So the idea is, if you wanted to reverse engineer this aspect, is that the more your strategy includes needs-based assessment, the higher are the opportunities for you to be more successful. Okay, so we're moving on to question number 2. Our digital marketing strategy makes clear what actors fit within, what actions fit within the marketing strategy and what does not. So this is quite important, especially if you have a multi-person team implementing that strategy. So again, the question that we're looking for most is that your marketing strategy or digital strategy makes most of your actions, plans, decisions for you. So that is the point we mentioned earlier. So the importance of stipulating the channels, the keywords we are trying to do, the kind of content we are talking about, and obviously the tone of voice, which might be relevant for us. And again, so if you don't have much constraints, if everybody can do anything they like in terms of implementing the strategy, then obviously that would be a 0. And if you don't know, if your strategy is not able to give you any direction, or you are not understanding that, so that chances are it's a -1. Okay, so the third question is, our digital marketing strategy clearly defines our intended competitive advantage to our buyer personas. And this is going back to Sam's talk about reviews and the importance of reviews to others who might be interested in purchasing products from us. So having the star ratings or testimonials or case studies from previous visitors is obviously a great way to implement this strategic point. But so in the number 2 is, if you can clearly state the reasons the buyer persona should buy from you and not their competitors, and substantiate that reason, is ultimately what we're looking for in your strategy implementation. Again, if you don't know, -1. If there is no strong support for the reasons your buyer persona should be choosing you, that's a 0. And if there is a reason, but you have no strong evidence to prove, that's sort of a 1. Okay, so I hope you are keeping up with your scoring, and obviously you are only going to be cheating yourself if you really are not going to give us the honest answers, but I hope that that one is giving you some ideas here. Okay, number 4, our digital marketing strategy allows synergy between the activities of the different parts of the organization. And this is quite important, again, to think about the need for online and offline collaboration, so especially for those that have a physical presence as well as the online presence. Ideally, the strategy uses best strengths of all departments. So obviously, departments doesn't necessarily mean just one team within one organization, but also those who might be on in physical contact with individuals, and obviously trying to synergize the activities and everybody understands what they're trying to do. So we're moving on to number 5. Digital marketing strategy is significantly different from that of our competitors for our buyer personas. Again, this is quite a difficult one, and ultimately what we're looking for is that you will attack different buyer personas with different value propositions. So different buyer personas could be based on their needs or geographical needs, and the value proposition that you might be offering to them could potentially be somewhat different to that of your competitors. This would be an ideal situation for most of our competitors. And this would potentially be the case for public sector organizations. So, for example, if there is no competitions, that would be something that, and if they are looking at a particular geographic area, that is certainly a competitive advantage for them. Again, if you are attacking the same buyer personas or the same value proposition, that's a 0. And if you are able to attack same buyer personas or use the same value propositions, that would be a 1. Number 6, and a compulsory picture of a cat for everyone, just to keep you going. We're halfway through. Our digital marketing strategy recognizes and makes full allowance for the needs and wants of our buyer personas. So ultimately, this is going back to the importance of understanding the needs and wants. And we also want to think about needs that aren't just sort of the logical sort of things that you would be able to pick up on the from statistics, we are also looking for emotional and ego needs, things that people don't necessarily want to talk about, but they sort of feel, and touchy-feely type of things do make a big, interesting persuasive tactic for us. So in this case, I'm using a cat trying to persuade you to keep with me. So that's my emotional opportunity to keep you with us. Okay, number 7, our digital marketing strategy recognizes and makes full allowance for the strategy of our competitors. Not all of our organizations are in the lucky position of public sector where you have the option of no competitors. But you have to bear in mind that if you are buying links or if you are building links, your competitors might be doing something as well. So whenever you're trying to think about your strategy, also try and keep an eye on competitors and integrate some kind of responsive activities where you might be able to pick up on your competitors' activities as well. So ultimately, we're going for number 2 if you're allowing for the competitors' digital marketing activities. Number 8, our digital marketing strategy recognizes and makes full allowance for the changes in the business environment that are beyond our control, such as technological legislation or social change. So this is a brilliant example for those organizations in the UK. So currently we have something that's called Brexit, which everybody knows it means breakfast. Brexit, and that's about it. So most organizations are having difficulties to plan, especially the export and import tactics. So that's a great view of keeping an eye on all these big sort of decisions, and obviously trying to combine efforts for all the external factors in your strategy would be really, really helpful, and that would be number 2. If you don't know, -1, and if your strategy is designed for today's conditions, that would be pretty much a 0. So this is quite interesting in terms of the Generation Y, in particular consumers that do expect technology pretty much in all the things that they're doing nowadays. So for those businesses that don't cater for those millennials nowadays, they will be struggling in some of the countries with high internet penetration, such as UK, and pretty much sort of growingly with most of the other countries as well. Okay, number 9, our digital marketing strategy avoids or compensates for those areas where we are relatively weak compared to our competitors. And ultimately what we're looking for here is your strategy should means that your relative weaknesses don't really matter. So the things that you want to focus on are your strengths. Again, if you don't know, that's -1. And number 10, our digital marketing strategy makes full use of those areas where we are relatively strong compared to our competitors. Again, so we're heading for number 2 here. If your digital marketing strategy means that your relative strengths become more important, that would be number 2. And if you have taken little or no account of your relative strengths, that would be a 0. So essentially, you're missing out a great option there. As Sam mentioned, obviously having the positive reviews and then making sure that those are getting sort of mentioned in PPC ads, it's a perfect example of a great opportunity to integrate strategies or the positive things, the strengths of the organization to be helping you to persuade future consumers. Number 11, 2 to go, guys, nearly there. Our digital marketing strategy, if successfully implemented, will meet all the objectives of the organization. So again, we're going for number 2, digital marketing strategy, fully and successfully implemented, delivers your financial and non-financial objectives. Ultimately, we are not just looking for the financial things that are an organization has far wider sort of remit, and we do want to be sustainable. So if we are just looking for making quick wins nowadays, but non-long-term sort of sustainability of the market, that would be quite difficult as well. And number 12, the last one, is the resources available to the organization are sufficient to implement the digital marketing strategy successfully. Again, so this is something that might be internal or external to an organization, and if you have both tangible and intangible resources to implement the digital marketing strategy, then obviously you're on the winner and you will be scoring yourself a 2. If you don't know, -1. If you have neither tangible nor intangible, that would be a 0. If you have either tangible or intangible, that would be a 1. So how did you score? I hope you were able to keep up with the scoring. So ultimately, what we are looking for and most of our organizations that we've done this test previously have had good or well done. Obviously, I'm not sure how honest they have been able to answer these kind of questions. If you scored 6 to 11, okay, let's hope your competitions are very weak. And 6, unless you are literally in the public sector and there is no competition, you would be having a lot of work ahead to get your organization into some good shape. Right, guys, so to summarize, ultimately what we suggest is that a buyer persona sprint can help you to link up your organization's ideas to the buyer personas. So making your objective smart, obviously specifying your content, data, and the channels and how you're going to be keeping on top of them would be a great way to try and keep up with those. And we hope that this will help you to understand how to make your strategy that bit more successful.